Shall we open our Bibles this morning to the book of Nehemiah, chapter 3, verse 1. Nehemiah 3:1. The book of Nehemiah begins in 446 BC as a young man born in captivity, a Jewish man. Had gotten a job as a king's food taster. He worked in an official government position, but he was a captive man, still living under the Babylonian rule and then later on the Medo-Persian rule. And Nehemiah began to have great concern for his people Israel, for Jerusalem, for their reputation, for their God. His brother had come back from Jerusalem some 700 miles away. He'd never had a chance to be there himself. But he had heard how disgraceful the people were living. No wall around the city, no protection from the enemy, kind of sitting ducks in danger of constant attack. He uses the words great distress and great reproach in chapter 1, verse 3. It had been about 91 years earlier that Cyrus had allowed the repatriation of Jerusalem from Babylon. And though some folks had gone back, no one had ever bothered to make this place safe, to bring honor back to it. The people were still, living under the auspices of the enemy who was there. And Nehemiah was determined, if the Lord would allow him, to do something about that, to be the answer to the problem. And so this book in the Old Testament becomes one of these premier books, not only on leadership and guiding others, but on discovering the will of God and then seeing what one life can mean to thousands of others, if you're just willing to do what God has instructed you to do. And Nehemiah is certainly that guy. Now, we looked in chapter 1 when we began at how ministry is born in the heart of an individual first. That what breaks your heart might very well be the very thing God is calling you to. And it certainly was for Nehemiah. And as he began to fast and pray over what seemed like an impossible, hope that he might one day get to go that far away and make something happen, Nehemiah spent 4 months just praying. Nothing changed. Nobody said boo. No door seemed open. It just wasn't going anywhere, except he also hadn't lost the concern. And so as he began to pray and as he planned, he just waited upon God. But he began to think about what would it take? What would it cost? What would I need? He began to write them down and think them through. I think it was Abraham Lincoln who wrote once, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Well, he had planned and he had worked hard at it. And so when the king in chapter 2 noticed he was discouraged and asked him why, and it scared him to death, Nehemiah didn't want to, be in trouble with the king. The guy was an all-powerful man. Nehemiah shared his heart with him and told him what he was concerned about. And the king asked lots of questions. How much, how long, where, when, who? And Nehemiah had all of the answers, and God moved on the heart of the king, and he allowed him to go and build. And Nehemiah, by the time you get to chapter 2, goes forward and spends a 3-month journey or so traveling with all of these things to Jerusalem, where he finally arrives and gets to see for the first time what he had hoped to deal with. And it was worse than he'd thought. Spent days, looking at what was going on, and then finally got the people together and said, look, I want to tell you what God has done in getting me here and what has brought me here and how I've gotten here and what I think we should do. And he shared with the people in chapter 2 there towards the end. And you read in verse 18 of chapter 2, I told them of the hand of my God which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise and build. And they set their hands to this good work. So getting the vision, sharing it, then even there at the end of chapter 2, the beginning of the opposition, which we looked at a little bit last week, and which we'll see quite a bit more of as we go. But we ended chapter 2 with Nehemiah and the people excited about what God was going to do. And so this morning we want to pick up the story in chapter 3, and we'd like to actually go all the way through to chapter 4, verse 9. So you're going to be here a while. Chapter 3 is a summary chapter, so we're going to kind of look over it in the big picture. But we've entitled the message this morning, A Mind to Work, A Heart to Pray, and an Eye to Watch. Because it really does define the people in their beginning to serve the Lord in this idea of building a wall. Chapter 3 gives us a detailed account of the start of this project. Who did what, where, how much, if any. And except for a dishonorable mention of a few proud elitists in verse 5. In fact, we can read it if you like. Next to them, the Tekoites made repairs, but their nobles did not put their shoulders to the work of their Lord. Aside from these guys, everyone else joined in the work. The smallest, the weakest, the richest, the most powerful, the most influential, and the discarded. Everyone showed up to begin to do this work. And what you find in chapter 3 is this united, excited, warm bond in faith. And the progress was almost immediately seen. I remember 24 years ago when Morning Star began that whenever you did anything as a small church, everyone showed up. You know, there were 40 people in the church. So if we had to set up the church Sunday morning, 40 people. They all just set up their own chair, pretty much. And when you had to clean it up, they all put it away, you know. And there was something about small that breeds unity. You know, everyone came for everything. And it didn't matter what it was. You didn't have to do an announcement other than just announce it once, and everyone was there. And part of the, I guess, difficulty of growing is after a while, not everyone goes to everything. There's many more things to draw attention, and the church gets larger. It accomplishes more, but at the same time, you know, you have smaller fellowships in the fellowship, so to speak, you know, and you find the place that God is serving. But I read chapter 3, and I think about the days that the church began. You know, everyone was willing to do their part, and everyone had a job to do, and they did it, and nobody seemed to be jealous of the other, and there was tremendous zeal. And as you read through this chapter, you'll find that some of the folks took 2 portions of wall and said, we'd like to do 2, you know, we only do 1, we'd like to do 2. Only them lazy Tekoite nobles didn't do anything. But as you read the names and what was accomplished, you know, it's the way God builds the church. People are called by the Lord. They do their part. They're happy in the place God puts them. They respect what others are doing. There's not a lot of friction or discontentment. And as you read through the chapter, and really the chapter is a report of the first half of the work being done, because that's what chapter 4 will tell us. In verse 6, they were halfway finished with this huge undertaking. It all came and grew from this desire of the people to serve the Lord. You know, one guy, the better part of a year earlier, sitting 700 miles away with a dream in his heart and a vision that God had given him, and now 7-8 months later, hundreds of folks building, serving together. I mean, what an awesome picture of what God can do if we'll just let him work. Why were so many involved? I think that you should never separate verse 18 of chapter 2 from all of chapter 3. Because like Nehemiah, the people needed to hear from God as well. And when he came and shared with them and gave them his testimony and pointed out what the Lord had done, it stirred the hearts of the people as well. Whenever a work of God is going to be accomplished, chapter 2 has to go before chapter 3. Unless there is a heart that has been touched, a true work of God can really not continue. The heart first, then the work. And it really can't be any other way. The Ephesian church for years had done so well. In fact, if you go to Turkey today, to where the church's ruins lie, of the 7 churches, the Ephesian ruins and their influence are obviously far greater than almost any of the other churches. Their work over the years, phenomenal. The largeness of the ministry was almost impossible to comprehend how God had worked. But by the time John in his 90s sits down to write the book of Revelation and God gives to him those letters to the churches, it is to the Ephesians that the Lord begins by saying, I know your work and your labor and your patience. I know how you can't bear up with those who are evil. I know how you've tested those that claim to be apostles and they're not, and you found that they were lying. I know how you've persevered and labored in my name's sake, and how you haven't become weary. I know the work that you're doing is great, and then you hit the word nevertheless. And you're thinking, what could be wrong at this point? We're cooking. We've got the best testimony around. Nevertheless, the Lord says, I have one problem, one thing against you. You have left, not lost, left your first love. And what happened to the Ephesians can so often happen to any work of God. The work remains. It churns away. It has a life of its own. But God isn't impressed, and nor is he pleased, nor is he moved to help, because there's been this separation between the heart and the work. Nehemiah gathered and shared the vision with the people in chapter 2, and it is they who said, let us rise up and work, and they set their hands to this good work. Oh, the Lord is doing something. And they joined the work that God was doing. But for the Ephesians, this motive of love had become very mechanical. And God marked explicitly the difference, that there was an outward show that continued. But there was no longer that true work of God. That had stopped. And the Lord said, I see what you're doing. Nevertheless, I see why. And I can't live with the why. So it is always important, I think, that we allow people to discover what God is doing in their hearts rather than seeking to push them in a direction that God hasn't called them. They all came to serve the Lord. And second of all, they all came to serve the Lord with the talents that they had. And they were pretty unique and diverse in their abilities. You know, when Peter wrote to the scattered saints years later, he said in chapter 4, if you're going to speak for the Lord, then speak for the Lord. Be his mouthpiece. And if you're going to come and serve someone, then you do it with the ability that God has given to you, so that in everything, God could be glorified through his son Jesus. But Peter goes out of his way to say, just serve to the best of your ability. Give what you can. Do what you're able. And know that to the Lord, that's enough. Bring what God has given you to the table. And you find here, as you read through these verses, that the people that were serving were most all of them not serving in the profession or in the calling that they were used to. But yet, everyone was needed. Everyone needed to show up. God was moving and the people were listening, but the laborers were pretty odd. You know, if you're going to build a wall, masonry people would be the right folks to pick, not priests and goldsmiths or rulers trying to mix concrete and trying to form walls. And I suspect that they weren't very straight because they're not very good at it, but their hearts were right. And we should make a distinction and never, I think, confuse ministry gifts, that which God enables you because he has called you, from just a calling to serve. We're all called to serve. We're all called to give our lives and to serve the Lord and to be available when there's a need. We may, have gifts that we use regularly, but when the need is presenting, we should serve and be willing to serve outside of our expertise. I'm always amazed when a need comes up and you'll say to someone, hey, would you like to help out? And they'll do this. Well, I don't feel called to that. Really? Yeah, that's not my gift, bro. What exactly is your gift, bro? And we separate ourselves from the need by the excuse that we don't have what it takes to accomplish the work that is so needy. These people were getting killed and robbed and mistreated. They needed a wall. No, that's not my calling, bro. Well, you better try. And I think if you read over this list, you'll find that as far as most of the giftings were concerned, these people were in the wrong place. But I don't think that you have to be called to the Sunday school to help out when needed or to show up on a paint day, even though you can't paint very well. The only people that did nothing, these nobles, they're the ones who made excuses. But I like the fact God keeps good records. Yeah, here's all the guys working, and then there's those boys. And he writes them down. They're not getting away with anything, And I love that they came to serve with what they had. They were able to just kind of be available and to be those that were supposed to be there, and they were, they weren't bragging. They certainly didn't have anything to brag about, but yet they were willing to come and serve. I mean, priests Verse 1, set the example. Come and work. And priests are not good at building. Their only danger in their life was a paper cut or eye strain. Oh, can't see. I've been reading all day. Now they're mixing concrete. Not exactly, qualified. But they were out there first, serving as they could, trying to put it out there. Also, not only did they have a personal conviction and they were willing to serve with what they had, but we find them working together. Jesus would later send out 12 apostles to train them 2 by 2, then 70 disciples for further teaching 2 by 2. And there's something about working with others that helps us. The loner is not really all that powerful or strong. The Bible doesn't say to us, don't forsake going to church for nothing. We need to be in fellowship. We need the accountability. We need the strength that the body brings. And so often, the guy who says, well, I don't need to go to church to be a Christian, doesn't really get it. You probably can get by, but you're not going to get by very well. And you'll certainly be in direct defiance against God's will. Everywhere you look in the scriptures, the work that God did, he did with others. Moses needed to hold up his staff so that the armies could win, but he had 2 guys holding up his arms. Aaron and Hur, they were there. Jonathan wanted to go out and see what God might want to do with him, but he first invited his armor bearer along so that they could do it together. And wherever you turn, work together brings, strength and protection. And it's one of the good reasons you go to church. You plug yourself in. But here the folks were working together, side by side, willing to serve wherever God placed them. And you get this chapter, and it's a catalog, and it's a worksheet, and their names and places, and it's this great organization. And everyone was doing the best that they could with the limited talent that they had, as an ever-growing camp of naysayers grew around them. I'm sure that the priests in verse 1 ended up with calluses for the first time in their life. What are these? Am I dying? They haven't picked up a shovel, picked up pens. Verse 10 tells us that some of the folks built in front of their own homes. Verse 23 repeats that. Verse 29 repeats that. Verse 30 repeats that. I think there's a good lesson in this lesson. You start your ministry in your house, by your home, where it matters to you the most. I'm always amazed that folks want to go to the mission field and do stuff that they won't do at home. Oh, I want to just go to the mission field and feed the poor. Great. You doing that here? No. I just want to go share my faith with the natives, You doing that in your neighborhood? Oh, no. Yeah, you're going to be good at it. If your heart is in it, you start at home. You're not going to be something else. We get folks that come in that want to get married, and you'll talk to them about the spiritual well-being of their husband or wife to be, and it isn't always like you hope it would be, But invariably they will say to each other, "Oh, it'll get better once we get married." No, it won't. Whatever you marry, that's what you get. It's not going to get better. Marriage is not part of the reclamation project, You got to be happy with what you're getting early on. Well, I know when we get married, things are going to change. No, they're not. They're going to get worse, not better. That guy's going to throw his underwear behind the door. He don't care. Feet up, seat down. It don't matter to him. You better like what you're getting when you get into it. Same thing with serving. You are what you are at home. And your ministry is certainly first at home. And it hits closest to home. We see moms going to work in the nursery, and you know who they usually are? Ones who've just had kids, because that's where their heart is. And we get, Mom, I want to work in the nursery. Well, I haven't seen you before, and here's my little baby, because now I have a heart to be there. And oftentimes they'll move right along with the kids. They'll 3rd grade, 4th grade, 6th grade, they just kind of follow their home around. We find that the folks who want to go to the jail ministry are oftentimes the folks who spent the most time there, because they have a heart for the people. They know what the needs are. That was home. That was their place. The folks who are involved in our feeding the poor and feeding the needy are oftentimes the folks who have had the hardest life, because they know what that means, so they're touched in their heart. It's close to home. Close to home. And Nehemiah understood that, and he just worked close to home. Minister where God has put you. Well, great leadership this guy showed. But first the heart of the people, then serving with what you had, not with what you didn't have. Just bring what you have. Do what you can. Work together. Stay close to home. And so chapter 3. And then we read in chapter 4, but it so happened when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he was furious, very indignant. He mocked the Jews and spoke before his brethren and before the army of Samaria and said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves and offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day and revive the stones from the heaps of the rubbish and the stones that have been burned? And Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, whatever they build, if even a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. One of the major lessons of the book of Nehemiah is how to serve the Lord while facing the opposition of the work, because it's a spiritual work. I think of Nehemiah for, the better part of a year now, going through this whole process and finally looking out one morning and seeing the walls begin to be built. And then immediately there are those folks up the road that begin to, in their anger and in their displeasure, begin to mock the work. The old sticks and stones may break my bones. They still hurt, don't they? Nobody likes to be criticized. Now, just reading the chapter, I would think that after 161 years of this wall being down, that anybody who showed any initiative to try to rebuild it, as bad as it might have been, should have brought the applause of most. That people would have went, wow, look at these guys are troopers. Look how hard they're trying. And that would have been true in a worldly sense, no doubt. But this is a spiritual work. And because it is God's work and there is an enemy, there's no praise coming, but what comes is criticism and derision. And if you learn nothing else, learn this. If you're going to serve the Lord, the enemy is going to try to stop you by criticizing you, by finding fault with you. There's nothing new here. This isn't like, wow, he's come up with a new idea. No, very old idea. If he can, because he's angry and furious at the work of God, his first step so often is just to mock you. Now, I would suspect that wouldn't be hard to make fun of the priests. I don't see the priests as big buffed guys. They're not swinging hammers. They're, okay, inkwell, there we go. Well, I got a strong pinky maybe or finger. But I could just see them going, look at that wimp trying to swing that sledgehammer. He's going to kill himself, And it would have been a correct criticism, I think, in the sense of what they saw. It did look feeble. Hey, go back and sacrifice something. You're no good at this. And you find the same thing as you go out to share your faith with people, You begin to share with them what God has done with you, and what you can get back sometimes is, well, you need that, I don't. I actually had a guy at the mall the other day. This is what he said to me. We were just standing in line, and he began to tell me about how miserable his marriage was. And I said to him, well, maybe you need the Lord in your life. And he said this, hey, dude. I didn't know my name was Dude, but dude, this is the 21st century. Get with it. And I didn't know what to say. And I'm usually not at a loss for a word. What has that got to do with it, But his implication was, look, he's very independent and self-sufficient. He'll come up with something. Well, maybe so. But I also believe if you continue to just be faithful to the Lord and share his word, eventually the testimony becomes the work itself. People get saved. Lives are changed. God is honored, People come. And you go, look at the people. Look what God has done. And then it's hard to criticize when God begins to do that work. So, to read after this wall began to be built in earnest and everyone's chipping in, that the enemy stood away from them. He just heard that it was happening. He wasn't there on site, but how the criticism begins. And people get saved, walls are built, lives are changed, one person at a time as the church is faithful. But how easy it is to stop being faithful because of the criticism of the enemy. And Satan is good at that. He'll mock your ideas, and he'll question your motives, and he'll point out your inabilities. He'll belittle your accomplishments, or seek to sidetrack you or challenge your zeal. He'll even bring up past failure. He's good at slowing you down. I remember when I first got saved, I picked up a guitar because all I wanted to do was lead worship. I had no musical talent. Still don't have a musical talent. But I wanted to play the thing, and worship, for the most part, maybe 3 chords, It's not hard to lead worship. Honestly, for music, go ahead and pick up a guitar, you'll be all right. I mean, to perform stuff, great, that's a little harder. But to do worship, to help people sing to the Lord, that's not so hard. But I practiced, and I went to the guy at home study, I got saved, and I go, I'd like to do worship next week. He goes, all right, you ready? Oh, I'm ready. And I did 4 songs, and I had papers everywhere, and all right, you guys ready? And, I messed up literally every beat and note, and the people would go, listen, what are you doing, dude? Come on, I was horrible. And I went home that night so discouraged, and the devil had my ear, and it was like, you're a loser, man. Get out of the way. Look what you're doing. You wrecked stuff. Yeah, I wrecked stuff. I want to do a who on the guitar and bust the thing up against the wall. But that's a lie of the devil. You can only bring what God has given you to do. You may not be called to certain things, but to think for 5 minutes that in your desire to serve the Lord, putting your best foot forward, you'd failed, that's a lie of the devil. Criticism in ministry is always that attempt on the part of the enemy to have you look at things from a human standpoint. Granted, by human standards, it didn't measure up. But in God's eyes, faith says he'll use the weak. And these guys were the weak. I understand that they were the weak. That they didn't really have what it took. And immediately as they began to work, people began to laugh. And like we mentioned, I think a couple of weeks ago, I think that the criticism was probably valid. I don't suspect that priests make good masons. They're probably not the best at this work. The wall probably did lean. I'm sure some of the workers had more cement on them than on the wall. What are you doing? Oh, dude, look at it. First time you paint, it's more on you than it is. It's everywhere except where it's supposed to be. And they even taunted their sacrifice and their enthusiasm and the zeal that they had. Oh, you're going to get done in a day. You're going to bring life to dead things. Oh, you guys are something else. But if you're aware of the enemy's criticism, then that doesn't keep you from giving God your best. Because that's all God is looking for, is your best. He wants you to put your best foot forward. I think if you will work as if it all depends upon you and pray knowing it all depends upon God, you'll come out of the other side with the right attitude of both persistence and dependence. That's what the people needed to learn. And I think that's what our lesson is from certainly chapter 3 and then early on here. Do your best. Give God your best. Be faithful and willing. God's not looking for talent. He's looking for commitment. He can give you talent, but he wants your heart. And eventually, unfortunately, as you go through this book, criticism began to take its toll. But for now, things were good. They stood fast. And the enemy continues to grow here. I mean, there's more and more numbers as you continue to read. And they were slanderers. And somehow, yelling across the way was supposed to stop the work. You guys are losers. You're terrible at it. You don't know what you're doing. This will never go anywhere. How did they keep from falling over? And the answer is back in chapter 2, verse 18. They kept their eyes on the Lord. And I think it's so important. God wants us to keep our eyes upon him. The enemy would like us to look around. Well, I look around, I can get discouraged pretty quickly. I keep my eyes on Jesus. Nothing can discourage me. Right? I mean, you can't be turned, the Lord will handle it. And while you mean that, boy, are you invincible, Well, Nehemiah, in response, begins to pray in verse 4. Hear, O our God, we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads, give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Don't cover their iniquity. Don't let their sin be blotted out from before you. They've provoked you to anger before the builders. Nehemiah doesn't fight back with insults. He fights on his knees. I don't know how you handle ridicule. Most people handle ridicule by going to get even. Let me just set the record straight. I'll just have a little word with him. We'll have a little talk about this. This will get worked out. Just give me a moment. Nehemiah doesn't do that. He goes, rats him out to the Father in heaven, Look what they're saying about you, Lord, and your work. And I love the picture, when Peter wrote to the saints in chapter 2 of his first letter, he said, it is commendable with God if because of your conscience towards him, you should endure grief and suffer wrongfully. It's all right with God if you just leave it with him. You don't need to set every record straight. God has the ability to do that. I do, however, like Nehemiah's anger. And I want to point that out because there's something, to be said for getting angry. Now, how you handle that anger is something else. Nehemiah did not take it upon himself to take these guys out. And he had guards with him and the king's permission. I think he probably could have got away with it. But he does show the Lord his anger. And, given that the Old Testament law of an eye for an eye was probably gripping his heart, the obvious lesson is he took it to the Lord. He didn't try to fake God out. He was honest with his feelings, but he also left it with God. So often we, Lord, I just want to pray for my enemies. I love them, Lord, not fooled. So he guarded himself by not saying anything. He just said it to the Lord. I think Solomon wrote in Proverbs, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word, it can stir up great anger. So the tongue of the wise studies how he might answer rightly. The mouth of the fool pours out foolishness. The heart of the righteous seeks how to answer. The mouth of the wicked pours forth evil. It just doesn't do you any good to fight spiritual battles in the flesh. So he prayed. And then we read in verse 6, and so we built the wall. How did we build the wall? With a mind to work and with a heart to pray. We prayed and then we built the wall. The entire wall was joined together up to half its height. The people had a mind to work. I'll tell you what, if you have a mind to work and a heart that's set in prayer before the Lord, opposition will not get to you. It is hard to mess with people that aren't distracted. Can you help me over here? Yeah, just a minute, I'm busy. Hard to get help from them. Hard to get someone's attention who's caught up in something else. If you have blinders on and you're looking to the Lord, it doesn't matter what people say because your eyes are on the Lord. Oh, you guys aren't any good. I know, but look, we're doing this. I love, in that sense, when people just try to criticize me personally, because I really don't care. I would have cared years ago. I could probably take it personal if I let it, but it's not my work, is it? It's God's work in us. It's his work. So, you tell me I'm an idiot. I knew that already. You need to bring something new to the table. I'm just glad God hasn't given up on us. But if you are preoccupied with him, then you're fine. They're out here, disparaging the work. Nehemiah's just saying, Lord, deal with them. And that's how we built the wall. The people had a mind to work. What a great verse. Satan has no trick that can hinder those with a mind to work and a heart to pray. Well, about halfway through, with great influence, verse 7 tells us it happened that then Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites, they all heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored. The gaps were beginning to be closed. They became very angry. And all of them conspired together to come and to attack Jerusalem and to create confusion. A more sinister cloud appears on the horizon. We talked a little bit last week that as the work of God grows, the enemy will change tactics and they'll usually get more brutal. And that's certainly the case here. Just look at verse 7 and all of the different people that are represented there just to see that the number opposing the work was growing. But so was the threats. And here's the interesting thing about verse 7. Most of these folks don't get along. I mean, if you look at history, these are the kind of guys that would fight each other to the death. But now they are brought together as friends against a common enemy, God's people. And I've always found that to be very interesting. Jesus was sent by Pilate to Herod, and you read there in Luke 23, verse 12, the day that Herod received Jesus from Pilate, it says they became friends before they hated each other. You read through the confrontations Jesus fought that last week in the temple, and you find groups of folks gathered together to try to discredit him who hated each other, but they hated him even more. So here's like the world and the fact these guys can't even get along, and they're coming from every corner. The Samaritans were to the north, the Arabians were to the south, those from Ammon would have been to the east, Philistia with its capital Ashdod is to the west, and now they're coming from every side. And they're not just coming to make fun, they're coming to make threats. In fact, they conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and to create fear and confusion. Not direct war, the king would have forbidden that, but terrorism. And we'll find you when you're not paying attention, and you better be careful. You're probably better off not showing up for work and not coming to the wall and all. Who knows where we're going to come from? Who knows when it's going to be? It could be day or night, when you least expect it. And their interest was to scare them. Now, if your eyes are on the Lord, this won't work either. At the height of the Roman persecution of the church in the first century, around 10,000 folks a day were getting killed for their faith. And 50,000 people a day were getting saved. I mean, it doesn't work. You can't eradicate the work of God, For those with Nehemiah, though, the cost for serving was now becoming much higher. And so we read in verse 9, nevertheless, even though all of this is going on, what did we do? We made our prayer to God, and because of them, we set a watch against them day and night. For the first time, Nehemiah's example of praying every time there was trouble is now shared by the people. Now you get the word we. Haven't had that yet. But the people now say to Nehemiah, maybe we should join you at that prayer thing, because they're threatening all of us. They prayed, and then they set a watch. And I think we talked last week that prayer is never a substitute for being responsible. But we prayed, we set a watch. The wall building didn't stop. The response was measured. They're going to come kill us. They're going to sneak in. We're going to set up a guard shack, a perimeter. We're going to watch over ourselves. However, we're going to continue to build. So, mind to work, heart to pray, and finally an eye to keep a watch, but yet the work continued. We mentioned, I think, last week when Moses at the Red Sea there in Exodus 14 went to pray, the Lord said to Moses something that you don't find the Lord saying very much in the Bible anywhere. He said to Moses, what are you doing praying? I think the literal words are, why are you crying out to me? But it's just a typical word for prayer. What are you doing praying, man? And then he says, you got to get moving. The Egyptians are getting close. Well, we got to go. It's a time to pray, a time to move. Tell the children of Israel to go forward. So, be wise, but also be faithful. I read again this month about the cult in the Midwest who are these snake handlers who tell you, if you have great faith, they shall not bite you, you shall not die. And I'm thinking, you guys are dumb. Snakes should just be avoided. This is free bit of advice for all of you. Stay away from snakes. Especially the ones that bite and stuff, They're not well portrayed in the Bible. But these clowns that want to tell you, hey, if you have faith, you can play with snakes. No, you stay away from snakes. So they prayed, and then they said, well, let's keep guys up at night. Let's keep an eye out. We want to be sure. We are surrounded by the enemy. Let none of them escape. Persistence with biblical common sense. David ran from Saul for 7.5 years. And he prayed a lot. Lord, deliver me. And you know what he got when he got done praying? What he did? He ran a lot. He ducked behind bushes. He hid in caves. He kept real quiet as they went by. Mind to work, heart to pray, and eye to watch, all to say the work continued. The people were blessed. God continued to use them. And Nehemiah becomes this very spiritual, practical man who keeps his feet on the ground, his ears in heaven. And God uses them greatly. What has God given you a mind to do? What would you like to see come from your life in serving the Lord? What has the Lord put on your heart? What are you doing about it? And how much is the not doing anything about it a result of the enemy's work and just trying to discourage you and keep you from what the Lord would love to do? There's still plenty of work to be done. God uses weak saints like us. He chose to do it. He could have just sent some contractor angels down, you know? He could have had this thing done in the morning. But he chooses to use us to confound the wise. He chooses to use the weak to confound the strong. He chooses to place this glory in these earthen vessels. So, laying aside the fact that you can't, you're not called, you're not able, you don't know what you were thinking, and all those other excuses, what are you going to do? What will God do with you? Plenty of opportunity. But if you have a mind to work and a heart that will pray and seek the Lord, and if you'll keep your eyes open to how the enemy would like to discourage, and don't allow him to do that, you can do a lot with just your best. Commit the rest. God, here's my best.